Picture this. It's December 1348, and you're huddled in a one-room stone cottage with your entire family. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's no central heating, no electric blankets, no modern insulation. The fire in your hearth is your only source of warmth, but firewood is running dangerously low. Your children are shivering despite wearing every piece of clothing they own, and you know that before morning, some of your neighbors might not survive the night. This is the story of how medieval families faced winter's deadly embrace... and the incredible survival techniques that kept humanity alive through the coldest, darkest months in history. Before we dive into this epic 5-hour journey through medieval winter survival, get comfortable under your warm blankets and hit that subscribe button if you love falling asleep to fascinating historical stories. Tonight, we're exploring the ingenious methods, desperate measures, and remarkable resilience that helped our ancestors survive winters that would kill most of us within hours. Dim the lights, settle in, and let's discover how medieval people turned the deadliest season into a time of survival, community, and hope... The year is 1348, and you're living in the small English village of Winterbourne. It's late October, and everyone around you is moving with an urgency that you can feel in the air. Without modern heating, insulation, or reliable food supplies, winter claimed more lives than war, disease, and famine combined during many years. Because understanding how families prepared for winter reveals the incredible ingenuity and desperation that drove human survival for centuries. The difference between a family that survived until spring and one that didn't often came down to the preparations they made during these crucial autumn weeks. This isn't the casual preparation for winter that we know today. This is preparation for a season that will literally determine who lives and who dies over the next 5 months. A typical peasant family needed approximately 3 to 4 cords of wood to survive a harsh winter. That's roughly 384 to 512 cubic feet of stacked firewood. This isn't simply a matter of cutting down any tree. Medieval forest law was complex and strictly enforced. Cutting the wrong tree, or taking more than your allotted share, could result in heavy fines, imprisonment, or even mutilation. But this wasn't just any wood. It had to be properly seasoned, meaning it had been cut. A day of tree felling left men exhausted, with blistered hands and aching backs. But the work couldn't stop. Every day of good weather was precious, and winter's approach was relentless. And onions, vegetables that could survive months of storage, if kept at the right temperature and humidity. Pears have been dried into leathery strips that will keep for months. Nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, and chestnuts have been gathered from the forest and stored in sacks, providing crucial fats and proteins for the winter diet. These weren't the large, perfect vegetables we see in modern grocery stores. Medieval vegetables were often small, tough, and not particularly flavorful, but they contained essential nutrients that could prevent scurvy and other diseases during the winter months, and dried for at least 6 months to burn efficiently and produce maximum heat. Your mother and sisters have been working since summer to gather and preserve every scrap of food that might help the family survive the lean months ahead. This wasn't just about having enough to eat. It was about having the right kinds of food to maintain health and energy during the coldest, darkest months of the year. Medieval winter wasn't just cold. It was a relentless enemy that tested every aspect of human survival. Let me take you through a typical day of winter preparation in medieval times. You wake before dawn to the sound of your neighbor's axe already biting into wood. Your family's pig, raised and fattened throughout the summer and autumn, has been slaughtered in a careful ritual that wasted nothing. The meat has been cut into precise portions, some to be eaten fresh, some to be salted, some to be smoked, and some to be made into sausages that could hang in the rafters for months. Thomas the carpenter has been up since 3 a.m., working by torchlight to split logs for his family's winter fuel supply. Every household in the village is racing against time, because once the heavy snows come, gathering firewood becomes nearly impossible. The mathematics of medieval winter survival were brutal and precise. Green wood, cut too recently, would burn poorly and fill homes with dangerous smoke. Wet wood would barely burn at all, wasting precious fuel while providing little warmth. The difference between well-seasoned oak and hastily cut green pine could mean the difference between life and death during a blizzard that lasted for weeks. Your father and older brothers have been making daily trips to the Lord's forest since August, carefully selecting trees that have been marked for peasant use. The work is backbreaking. Medieval axes were heavy, poorly balanced by modern standards, and required enormous strength and skill to use effectively. Women and children weren't idle during this preparation period. The root cellar beneath your house has been carefully stocked with turnips, parsnips, carrots, arranged so that if one apple begins to rot, it won't spoil the others. Apples have been carefully wrapped in straw and stored in wooden barrels. The preservation of meat was perhaps the most critical aspect of winter preparation. The process of preserving meat was both art and science. Too little salt, and the meat would rot. Too much salt, and it would become inedibly tough and salty. The smoking process required constant attention. The fire had to be kept at exactly the right temperature, with the right kind of wood, for days at a time. A mistake in meat preservation could doom a family to starvation before spring. But food and fuel weren't the only concerns. Your family has been working to make your house as winter-ready as possible, using techniques passed down through generations of ancestors who had learned through trial and error what worked and what didn't. The gaps between the stones in your walls have been carefully packed with a mixture of mud, straw. Linen undergarments absorbed moisture from the skin, wool outer garments provided warmth, and leather or fur outer layers protected against wind and precipitation. And animal dung, a combination that might sound disgusting to modern sensibilities, but was actually an effective insulator. Families have been forming informal alliances, agreeing to share resources and help each other through the worst weather. The miller has been working overtime to grind grain into flour while the streams still flow freely once winter sets in. Frozen water wheels will make milling impossible. It will require careful management of resources, strict rationing of fuel and food, and the kind of community cooperation that could mean the difference between survival and death. Cooking pots and the simple but crucial implements needed to maintain fires and prepare food. A broken cooking pot or damaged fire iron could be a death sentence during a winter storm when replacement was impossible. Glass windows were a luxury that only the wealthy could afford, and even they often covered their windows with additional materials during the worst winter weather. The thatched roof has been inspected and repaired, with fresh straw added where needed to prevent leaks that could be deadly during winter storms. It provides insulation from the cold ground, absorbs moisture and spills, and can be changed periodically to maintain some level of cleanliness. During winter, this floor covering becomes even thicker, creating a barrier between your family and the frozen earth below. Windows, if your family is fortunate enough to have any, have been covered with oiled cloth or animal skins to keep out the wind while still allowing some light to enter. The floor of your house has been covered with a thick layer of rushes and straw, which serves multiple purposes. Your family's clothing has also been carefully prepared for winter. This isn't a matter of simply buying warmer clothes. In medieval times, every piece of clothing was handmade and represented months of work. Wool has been spun into thread, thread has been woven into cloth, and cloth has been sewn into garments using techniques that maximized warmth while conserving precious materials. Layering was the key to medieval winter clothing. Multiple thin layers trapped air and provided better insulation than single thick garments. But even with all these preparations, your family knows that winter survival will require more than just stored food and warm clothing. The village has been organizing itself for winter as well. The blacksmith has been busy making and repairing tools that will be essential for winter survival, fire irons. The village's animals have also been prepared for winter in ways that modern people might find surprising. Cattle, sheep and goats have been brought into shelters that are often attached to or even part of human dwellings. This wasn't just to protect the animals. Their body heat helped warm the houses. Medieval people understood that winter was not just a season of cold weather. It was a time of isolation, darkness, and constant threat. Families had to prepare mentally for months of being confined together in small spaces, with limited food, minimal light, and the constant stress of survival. And their presence meant that families could continue to get milk, eggs, and other animal products throughout the winter. Pigs, chickens, and other smaller animals were often brought directly into the main living areas of houses during the coldest weather. How much firewood is stacked outside? How much food is stored in the cellar? Are there enough warm clothes for everyone? Have all the tools been repaired and sharpened? These aren't casual questions. They read life and death calculations that will determine your family's fate over the coming months. You understand that everything your family has done over the past months has been leading to this moment. The real test is about to begin, and only the families who have prepared well and who have a bit of luck will see the spring flowers bloom again. Modern people might find this unsanitary, but medieval families understood that the survival of their animals was directly linked to their own survival. The preparations are nearly complete, but the hardest part lies ahead. Winter is coming, and it shows no mercy to those who are unprepared. Once the heavy snows begin, there will be no more gathering of firewood, no more hunting or foraging, no more travel to markets or neighboring villages. Your family will be on their own, dependent entirely on what they have managed to store and preserve during the preparation months. A cow that froze to death meant no milk for the children. Chickens that died in the cold meant no eggs to supplement the winter diet. Families made sure their relationships with the local priest were strong, their tithes were paid, and their standing in the religious community was secure. In times of desperate need, the church might be the only source of help available. The psychological preparation for winter was just as important as the physical preparation. The first frost has already killed the last of the garden vegetables, and the leaves are falling from the trees in great drifts that crunch underfoot. The air has a sharp bite that warns of the cold to come, and everyone knows that time is running out. Stories, songs, and games were prepared as carefully as food and fuel. These weren't just entertainment. They were essential tools for maintaining mental health and family cohesion during the long, dark months ahead. A family that could maintain morale and cooperation through the winter was much more likely to survive than one that fell into despair or conflict. Religious preparation was also crucial. The church provided not just spiritual comfort, but also practical support during winter emergencies. As October turns to November, the pace of preparation becomes even more frantic. Your family gathers around the fire each evening to check and recheck their preparations. The first snow usually comes in late November or early December, and when it does, it marks the beginning of a siege that will last until March or April. As you fall asleep on this cold October night, listening to the wind rattling the shutters and feeling the first real chill of approaching winter tomorrow, the serious business of winter survival will begin in earnest. The morning of November 15, 1348, dawns gray and bitter. You wake to find frost covering the inside of your shutters, and your breath forms clouds in the frigid air of your own home. This is the sudden, shocking transition from autumn survival to winter siege. The temperature has dropped 20 degrees overnight, and everyone in the village knows that this is just the beginning. The real cold, the kind that kills, is still to come. Outside, the world has transformed overnight. The first hard freeze has arrived, and with it, the beginning of medieval winter's deadly embrace. The fire never goes out during winter. It can't. Pine burned quickly and bright, ideal for cooking or providing light for evening work. The root vegetables stored in your cellar are now the foundation of every meal, but they require careful preparation to be both nutritious and palatable. Turnips and parsnips, tough and fibrous when raw, must be slowly cooked to become edible. The grain stored in your family's wooden chests must be carefully rationed to last until the next harvest, still 6 months away. Your mother grinds only small amounts of grain at a time, using a hand-operated quern that requires considerable strength. A family of mice could consume or contaminate enough grain in a single winter to cause human starvation. Wells that provided clean water during warmer months now require constant attention to prevent freezing. Your family must break ice on the well each morning, a task that becomes increasingly difficult as winter progresses and the ice grows thicker. Rats could chew through wooden storage containers and ruin months of carefully preserved food in a matter of days. But storing water in medieval times was problematic. Wooden barrels could freeze and crack. Ceramic jugs could shatter, and any stored water could become contaminated with bacteria or algae. Every grain of wheat, every dried pea, every preserved apple was precious beyond modern comprehension. Snow had to be collected in clean containers, melted slowly to avoid wasting fuel, and used quickly before it could become contaminated. The process was time-consuming and fuel-intensive, adding to the already overwhelming demands of winter survival, and produces flour that is coarse and often contaminated with bits of stone from the grinding process. Your family layers every available garment, creating bulky, cumbersome outfits that make movement difficult but provide essential warmth. Wool stockings, linen undergarments, woolen tunics, leather outer garments, and fur-lined cloaks combine to create a barrier against the cold that is both effective and restrictive. This cooking process consumes precious fuel and requires constant attention to prevent burning. Birch bark was excellent for starting fires, while apple wood burned with a pleasant smell that helped mask the other odors of medieval life. Salt pork, hard as leather after months of curing, must be soaked and slowly cooked to become edible. Smoked sausages, hanging from the rafters like strange ornaments, are sliced thin and used to flavor the endless succession of porridges and stews that will make up most winter meals. Every type of wood had its place in the complex ecology of winter survival. Relighting a fire from scratch in medieval times was difficult and time-consuming, requiring flint, steel, and tinder that might not work in humid or wet conditions. More importantly, allowing the fire to die meant allowing the house to reach the same temperature as the outside air, which could be fatal for the very young, very old, or sick members of the family. This isn't the gradual cooling that modern people experience in heated homes and cars. Your father is already awake, crouched by the fire pit in the center of your one-room home. The wooden chests where grain is stored must be checked constantly for signs of mice, rats, or insects that could destroy your family's food supply. Medieval people had no effective pesticides or pest control methods, so they relied on cats, traps, and constant vigilance to protect their stored food. The fire that will keep your family alive for the next 4 months is fed constantly but carefully. Every piece of wood is precious, and your father has developed an almost supernatural ability to judge exactly how much fuel to add to maintain heat without waste. Too much wood and you'll run out of fuel before spring. Too little and someone might freeze to death during the night. The mathematics of medieval fire management were complex and unforgiving. A typical peasant fire consumed about half a cord of wood per month during the coldest weather. That meant your family's entire winter fuel supply. Those 3 to 4 cords so carefully gathered and seasoned would be consumed at a steady, relentless pace that allowed no room for error or waste. But it wasn't just about quantity, it was about technique. Medieval people had developed sophisticated methods for managing fires that modern people have largely forgotten. They understood how to bank a fire at night, covering it with ash to slow the burning while keeping the coals alive until morning. They knew how to arrange logs to create maximum heat with minimum fuel consumption. They could judge the quality of different woods and use each type for its optimal purpose. Oak burned long and hot, perfect for overnight fires that needed to last until dawn. Your mother is already preparing the morning meal, but winter cooking is a far different challenge than summer food preparation. The preserved meat that will sustain your family through winter must be used sparingly and prepared carefully. Bread, the staple of medieval diet, becomes even more precious during winter. But even getting to the grain storage presents challenges that modern people can barely imagine. Mice and rats weren't just nuisances. They were potential death sentences. The water situation becomes critical with the first hard freeze. Streams and rivers that provided water during summer are now frozen solid, forcing families to rely entirely on wells or stored water. Many families resorted to melting snow for water, but this presented its own challenges. The clothing that seemed adequate during autumn preparation now proves insufficient against the bitter cold. But even with all these layers, staying warm requires constant attention and movement. Medieval people understood that circulation was crucial for preventing frostbite and hypothermia. They developed exercises and activities that could be performed in small spaces to keep blood flowing and maintain body temperature. Children were particularly vulnerable to the cold, and families developed special techniques for keeping the youngest members alive through the winter. Babies were wrapped in multiple layers of cloth and kept close to their mothers' bodies for warmth. With no electric lights and limited supplies of candles or oil for lamps, families lived by the rhythm of the fire and the brief daylight hours. Work had to be planned around available light, and many tasks that were simple during summer became difficult or impossible during winter's long nights. The sudden transition from the relative freedom of autumn to the confinement of winter was difficult for everyone, but especially for children and young adults who were accustomed to spending time outdoors. Storytelling became a crucial survival skill, with older family members sharing tales that entertained, educated, and helped pass the long, dark hours. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were repositories of cultural knowledge, moral instruction, and family history that helped maintain social bonds during the isolation of winter. Older children were given specific tasks that required movement, tending the fire, stirring cooking pots, or helping with simple crafts that kept their hands and minds occupied. The elderly faced their own challenges during medieval winters. Age-related health problems that were manageable during warmer months became life-threatening when combined with cold, poor nutrition, and limited mobility. These tasks served multiple purposes. They provided necessary preparation for the coming year. They kept hands. Generosity that went too far could doom the generous family to starvation or freezing. The social calculations required to navigate these relationships were complex and often painful. And minds busy, and they gave families something to look forward to beyond mere survival. Each day begins with the same routine: tending the fire, checking food stores, preparing meals, and managing the countless small tasks that keep a medieval household functioning during winter. Each night ends with the same careful preparations: banking the fire, arranging sleeping areas for maximum warmth, and hoping that everyone will survive until morning. The real test is yet to come, but they have proven that they can endure winter's initial assault. Now they must prepare for the deeper cold, the longer nights, and the greater challenges that lie ahead in the heart of medieval winter. Religious festivals and holy days gave families something to anticipate and celebrate, breaking up the monotony of winter survival. Church services provided opportunities for social interaction and community support that were otherwise rare during winter months. Simple board games carved from wood, dice made from bone, and card games played with handmade cards helped pass time and maintain mental health. These celebrations served important psychological and social functions, providing hope, community bonding, and temporary relief from the grinding routine of survival. Women continued spinning and weaving during winter months, both to produce needed textiles and to keep their hands and minds occupied during the long confinement. Many elderly people didn't survive their first serious winter illness. January and February will bring the coldest temperatures, the heaviest snows, and the greatest test of your family's preparation and endurance. The food stores that seemed adequate in November are already showing signs of depletion. and the carefully hoarded firewood is burning away at a rate that makes everyone nervous about lasting until spring. Most families relied on the light from their fires for evening activities, which meant that everyone had to crowd close to the hearth. Families began the careful process of sharing resources and supporting each other through the coming months. Those with particular skills, such as the ability to repair tools or treat minor injuries, became valuable community resources. The village's few literate members might read aloud from religious texts or other books, providing entertainment and education for the entire community. This wasn't charity in the modern sense. It was a complex system of mutual aid that had evolved over generations of harsh winters. This created problems of its own. Too many people around a small fire meant that some stayed warm while others remained cold. And the competition for the best spots near the fire could create family tensions. Heated stones or bricks were wrapped in cloth and placed in beds to provide warmth that would last for several hours. These bed warmers had to be heated carefully. Too hot, and they could cause burns. Too cool, and they provided little benefit. And families had to make difficult decisions about how to allocate limited resources among family members of different ages and health conditions. Sleep during medieval winter required careful planning and preparation. Beds were moved as close to the fire as safely possible, and families often slept together for warmth. The darkness of medieval winter was almost as challenging as the cold. Candles were expensive and used sparingly, usually only for essential tasks that couldn't wait for daylight. The psychological challenges of early winter were just as significant as the physical ones. Families had to establish routines and activities that would maintain morale and prevent the depression and anxiety that could be as deadly as cold or hunger. Games and crafts also played important roles in winter survival. Men worked on tool maintenance and repair, crafting new implements that would be needed for spring planting, and planning the next year's agricultural activities. The community aspects of winter survival became apparent as the first serious cold settled over the village. Families with more firewood might share with those who had less in exchange for help with other tasks or future reciprocal aid. But this community cooperation had to be balanced against the harsh reality that resources were limited and every family's first responsibility was to its own survival. Religious observance became even more important during winter months. The church provided not just spiritual comfort, but also practical support and community organization. The feast days of winter, Christmas, Epiphany, and Candlemas were celebrated despite the hardships, though the celebrations were often modest by modern standards. As December progresses and the cold deepens, your family settles into the rhythm of winter survival. The first month of winter has passed, but everyone knows that the hardest part is still ahead. But your family has survived the first freeze, adapted to the new rhythm of winter life, and established the routines that will carry them through the months ahead. January 12, 1349. You wake to a silence so complete it's terrifying. The usual sounds of village life, dogs barking, roosters crowing, the distant sound of axes splitting wood, are all muffled by the deepest snow your village has seen in a generation. The thermometer, if such a thing existed in your world, would read -25 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills that make the air itself feel like a weapon against exposed skin. This is the time when medieval winter claims the most lives, when the difference between survival and death can be measured in degrees, in hours, in the thickness of a wall, or the dryness of firewood. Burn too much today, and the family might freeze in February. Ice covers the inside walls, formed from the breath and body heat of the family meeting the frigid air that seeps through every crack and gap. The floor, despite its thick covering of rushes and straw, is frozen solid. Water left in containers overnight becomes solid ice that must be melted before it can be used. Burn too little, and someone might not survive tonight. The pressure of making these life and death decisions every few hours is taking a visible toll on your father's health and mental state. Outside your small window, snow has drifted nearly to the roofline. and the cold is so intense that your breath freezes instantly in the air. Every 2 hours, he rises from the family sleeping area to tend the fire, adding just enough wood to keep the flames alive without wasting precious fuel. The fire that seemed so robust in November now struggles against the overwhelming cold, and everyone in the family understands that their lives depend on these middle-of-the-night vigils. This is the deep freeze, the heart of medieval winter when temperatures plummet to levels that test every aspect of human survival. Your father hasn't slept through the night in weeks. The mathematics of survival have become even more precise and unforgiving. Your family's carefully calculated firewood supply is being consumed faster than anticipated because of the extreme cold. What should have been a month's supply of fuel is lasting only 3 weeks. Your father spends his waking hours calculating and recalculating how much wood remains, how many weeks of winter are left, whether the family can survive on reduced heat to make the fuel last longer. These aren't abstract calculations. Every piece of wood that goes into the fire represents a choice between warmth now and survival later. The cold has transformed your house into something barely recognizable from its autumn state. January 12, 1349. You wake to a silence so complete it's terrifying. The usual sounds of village life, dogs barking, roosters crowing, the distant sound of axes splitting wood, are all muffled by the deepest snow your village has seen in a generation. The thermometer, if such a thing existed in your world, would read minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills that make the air itself feel like a weapon against exposed skin. This is the time when medieval winter claims the most lives, when the difference between survival and death can be measured in degrees, in hours, in the thickness of a wall, or the dryness of firewood. Outside your small window, snow has drifted nearly to the roofline, and the cold is so intense that your breath freezes instantly in the air. Ice covers the inside walls, formed from the breath and body heat of the family meeting the frigid air that seeps through every crack and gap. Sleeping areas have been moved to within a few feet of the hearth. Cooking, eating, and all other activities take place in a circle around the flames. The extreme cold has affected your family's stored food supplies in unexpected ways. Root vegetables in the cellar have begun to freeze despite being underground, turning them into inedible mushy masses when they thaw. The grain stores are holding up reasonably well, but grinding flour in the extreme cold is difficult and dangerous. The metal parts of the hand quern become so cold they can cause frostbite on contact. Breaking through this ice each morning requires tools, strength, and time that your family can barely spare. The work is dangerous, the ice is slippery, the tools are heavy, and a fall into the well would likely be fatal. And the grinding process itself generates so little heat that your mother's hands become numb and clumsy, making the work slower and more difficult. Preserved meats have become so hard from the cold that they read difficult to cut and require longer cooking times, consuming more precious fuel. The fuel required to heat the oven properly could keep your family warm for hours, so bread baking becomes a weekly event rather than a daily one. This means that much of your family's bread is stale or moldy by the time it is consumed, but there's no alternative. The rest of the house has been essentially abandoned to the cold, with doors and curtains hung to separate the heated area from the frozen sections. Soups and stews are stretched with water to feed more people, but this dilution reduces their nutritional value at the very time when family members need more calories to maintain body heat. This means that all water-related activities, cooking, cleaning, drinking, must be planned around the fire's location and the limited supply of liquid water available at any given time. Every meal is a careful balance between providing enough food to maintain strength and conserving supplies to last until spring. The floor, despite its thick covering of rushes and straw, is frozen solid. Water left in containers overnight becomes solid ice that must be melted before it can be used. Every 2 hours, he rises from the family sleeping area to tend the fire, adding just enough wood to keep the flames alive without wasting precious fuel. The fire that seemed so robust in November now struggles against the overwhelming cold. And everyone in the family understands that their lives depend on these middle-of-the-night vigils. And your elderly grandmother are now living in a space roughly 8 feet in diameter. Privacy has completely disappeared. Tensions that were manageable when people could spread out through the house now flare into arguments and conflicts that threaten family unity at the very time when cooperation is most essential for survival. This is the deep freeze, the heart of medieval winter when temperatures plummet to levels that test every aspect of human survival. Your family's carefully calculated firewood supply is being consumed faster than anticipated because of the extreme cold. What should have been a month's supply of fuel is lasting only 3 weeks. Your father spends his waking hours calculating and recalculating how much wood remains, how many weeks of winter are left, whether the family can survive on reduced heat to make the fuel last longer. Your father hasn't slept through the night in weeks. The mathematics of survival have become even more precise and unforgiving. These aren't abstract calculations. Every piece of wood that goes into the fire represents a choice between warmth now and survival later. Burn too much today, and the family might freeze in February. Burn too little, and someone might not survive tonight. The pressure of making these life and death decisions every few hours is taking a visible toll on your father's health and mental state. The cold has transformed your house into something barely recognizable from its autumn state. Your family has adapted their living space to concentrate all activity around the fire. This concentration around the fire creates its own problems. 7 people, your parents, yourself, your 3 siblings. The food situation has become critical in ways that go beyond simple quantity. Your mother has become an expert in extracting maximum nutrition from minimal ingredients. The bread that forms the foundation of your family's diet has become a particular challenge. Baking bread in winter requires careful fuel management. The oven, a clay structure attached to your fireplace, must be heated with precious firewood before it can bake bread. Water has become one of your most serious challenges. The well that served your family through autumn is now frozen solid, with ice extending several feet down the shaft. Even when water is obtained, it must be used immediately or stored in containers kept close to the fire to prevent refreezing. Many families have resorted to melting snow for water, but this process is more complex than it might seem. Snow must be collected in clean containers, which means venturing outside in dangerous conditions. The melting process consumes fuel and produces relatively small amounts of water. It takes roughly 10 inches of snow to produce 1 inch of water. The resulting water often tastes flat and strange, and it can become contaminated if the snow is collected from areas where animals have been. Personal hygiene, already minimal by modern standards, has become almost non-existent during the deep freeze. Washing with water is impossible when water freezes within minutes of being heated. Your family, like everyone in the village, has developed alternative methods of staying clean that would shock modern sensibilities. Dry cleaning with sand, ash, or rough cloth removes some dirt and oil from skin and hair. Changing undergarments when spare clothes are available helps maintain some level of cleanliness. But for the most part, medieval families simply accepted that winter meant living with body odors, unwashed hair, and clothing that wouldn't be properly cleaned until spring. Skin conditions, infections, and parasites thrived in the dirty, crowded conditions of winter survival. This lack of hygiene wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. Lice and fleas, already common in medieval times, multiplied rapidly in the warm, unwashed environment around the fire. These parasites weren't just annoying. They could carry diseases that were particularly dangerous for people already weakened by cold and poor nutrition. Sleep during the deep freeze requires elaborate preparation and constant vigilance. Your family has developed a system where the youngest and oldest members sleep closest to the fire, with the strongest adults on the outside to provide additional insulation. Everyone sleeps fully clothed, often wearing every piece of clothing they own. Heated stones, wrapped in cloth and placed in the sleeping area, provide temporary warmth that can make the difference between sleep and a night of shivering misery. But these stones must be heated carefully and replaced every few hours throughout the night. Someone, usually your father, must wake regularly to reheat stones and tend the fire, meaning that no one in the family gets a full night's uninterrupted sleep. The psychological challenges of the deep freeze are as severe as the physical ones. The combination of extreme cold, limited food, crowded living conditions, and constant stress creates mental health problems that medieval people had no way to understand or treat. Depression, anxiety, and what we would now recognize as symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder were common during severe winters. Family conflicts that might be minor annoyances during warmer months become serious threats to survival when everyone is trapped together in a small space. Arguments over food distribution, sleeping arrangements, or fire management can escalate into violence that endangers the entire family. Your parents spend considerable energy managing family dynamics and preventing conflicts that could be fatal in the current circumstances. Children are particularly vulnerable during the deep freeze, both physically and psychologically. Their smaller bodies lose heat more quickly than adults, and they require more calories per pound of body weight to maintain their energy. But children also struggle with the confinement and boredom of winter survival in ways that can be dangerous for the entire family. Your youngest sister, only 4 years old, doesn't understand why she can't go outside to play or why food is so strictly rationed. Her crying and complaints not only drain the family's emotional resources, but also consume energy and create noise that can be heard by neighbors, potentially alerting them to your family's distress and making you targets for theft or violence. The village community, so important for autumn preparation and early winter survival, becomes more fragmented during the deep freeze. Travel between houses is dangerous or impossible, and families become isolated in their individual struggles for survival. The mutual aid and resource sharing that characterized early winter gives way to a more desperate focus on individual family survival. But this isolation also creates new dangers. When families don't see their neighbors for days or weeks at a time, deaths can go unnoticed until spring. Houses where entire families have frozen or starved to death become sources of disease and contamination. The social bonds that held the community together during easier times are strained to the breaking point by the extreme conditions. Some families don't survive the deep freeze. The Millers, who live 3 houses down from your family, haven't been seen for over a week. Smoke stopped rising from their chimney 5 days ago, and everyone in the village knows what this probably means. But no one has the strength or resources to check on them. Their house will remain sealed by snow and ice until spring, when the survivors will discover what happened to them. The death of neighboring families serves as a constant reminder of how precarious your own survival is. Every morning that your family wakes up alive is a small victory, but it's also a reminder that tonight might be the night when your fuel runs out, your food supplies fail, or someone becomes too sick or weak to continue fighting the cold. Religious faith becomes both more important and more challenging during the deep freeze. The comfort of religious belief helps families cope with the constant threat of death, but attending church services becomes impossible when travel is too dangerous. Families must rely on their own prayers and religious observances, often led by the oldest or most knowledgeable family member. Your grandmother, despite her physical frailty, becomes the family's spiritual leader during this time. Her knowledge of prayers, religious stories, and moral teachings provides comfort and guidance when everyone is struggling with despair and fear. Her presence also serves as a reminder of the importance of caring for the most vulnerable family members, even when resources are desperately limited. The Feast of Epiphany, celebrated on January 6th, provides a brief respite from the grinding routine of survival. Despite the extreme conditions, your family manages to prepare a slightly better meal than usual and to spend time in prayer and reflection. These religious observances aren't just spiritual exercises. They psychological survival tools that help maintain hope and family unity during the darkest time of the year. As January progresses and the deep freeze continues, your family's survival strategies become more desperate and creative. Furniture and non-essential wooden items are broken up and burned when firewood supplies run dangerously low. Clothing and blankets are shared and redistributed based on who needs them most urgently. Food rationing becomes even more strict, with meals reduced to barely adequate portions that leave everyone constantly hungry. The extreme cold has also affected the village's animals, which are crucial for survival. Chickens that provided eggs throughout early winter have stopped laying because of the cold and reduced food. Some have frozen to death despite being kept in shelters. The family's goat, which provided milk for the children, is producing less milk and requires more food to maintain her health. These animal losses aren't just economic setbacks. They reap potential death sentences for families that depend on animal products for nutrition. The eggs that supplemented your family's protein intake are no longer available. The milk that provided essential nutrients for your youngest siblings is becoming scarce. Every animal death reduces your family's chances of surviving until spring. But somehow, your family continues to endure. Each morning brings new challenges and new evidence of the cold's relentless assault on human survival. Each evening brings the relief of having survived another day and the anxiety of wondering whether tomorrow will be the day when your resources finally run out. The deep freeze is testing every aspect of your family's preparation, endurance, and will to survive. The next few weeks will determine whether your family joins the ranks of winter survivors or becomes another casualty of medieval winter, as deadly embrace. The worst of winter is upon you, but spring, still months away, remains. A distant hope that keeps your family fighting through each frozen day and frigid night. February 20th, 1349. The deep freeze has finally broken, but its aftermath has left your village in a state that would be unrecognizable to anyone who knew it in autumn. What should be a relief? The temperature has risen to a relatively balmy 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Instead reveals the devastating toll that winter has taken on your community and your family. This is the breaking point of medieval winter survival, the time when carefully hoarded resources run dangerously low and families must make the most desperate decisions of their lives. The food stores that seemed adequate in November are now nearly exhausted. The firewood that was so carefully calculated to last until spring is running out faster than anticipated. Most critically, the physical and psychological reserves that have sustained your family through the worst of winter are approaching complete depletion. Your father looks like a different person than he did 6 months ago. The constant stress of managing resources, the interrupted sleep from tending fires, and the inadequate nutrition have aged him visibly. His clothes hang loose on his diminished frame, and his eyes have the hollow look of someone who has been making life and death decisions for too long. The weight of keeping his family alive through winter has taken a toll that will affect him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. The food situation has become critical in ways that go beyond simple hunger. Your family's grain stores, carefully rationed throughout winter, are now reduced to perhaps 2 weeks' supply. The root vegetables that formed the foundation of winter meals are nearly gone, with only the smallest and least appetizing specimens remaining. The preserved meat that provided essential protein and fat is down to a few remaining pieces that must be saved for the most desperate circumstances. But it's not just the quantity of food that's problematic, it's the quality. Months of storage in less than ideal conditions have taken their toll on your family's food supplies. Much of the remaining grain is contaminated with mold, mouse droppings, or insects. The vegetables that remain are often partially rotten, requiring careful trimming to remove inedible portions. Even the preserved meat shows signs of spoilage that would be dangerous under normal circumstances, but might be acceptable when the alternative is starvation. Your mother has become expert at extracting nutrition from food sources that would have been unthinkable earlier in winter. Bones that were previously discarded are now boiled repeatedly to extract every bit of marrow and nutrients. Vegetable peelings and scraps that once went to the animals are now incorporated into family meals. Even moldy bread is carefully scraped and used, despite the health risks, because every calorie has become precious. The meals that sustain your family bear little resemblance to the hearty stews and substantial bread portions of early winter. Breakfast might consist of a thin gruel made from the last of the oats, stretched with water and flavored with whatever herbs or seasonings remain. Dinner could be a watery soup containing a few pieces of turnip, some scraps of preserved meat, and whatever else can be found to add substance and flavor. These inadequate meals leave everyone in the family constantly hungry. But hunger is just the beginning of the problems caused by malnutrition. Your youngest brother, only 6 years old, has developed the swollen belly and listless behavior that indicates serious nutritional deficiency. Your sister's hair has become thin and brittle, and she complains constantly of feeling cold even when sitting close to the fire. The adults are showing signs of malnutrition as well. Your father's strength has diminished noticeably, making it difficult for him to perform the physical tasks necessary for survival. Your mother's milk, which has been sustaining your infant sister, has decreased in both quantity and quality. Everyone in the family is more susceptible to illness, injury, and the effects of cold because their bodies lack the resources needed to maintain normal function. The firewood situation is equally desperate. The carefully calculated fuel supply that was supposed to last until April is now projected to run out in early March, still weeks before spring weather makes heating less critical. Your family faces the terrible choice between staying warm now and having no fuel for the final weeks of winter. This fuel shortage has forced increasingly desperate measures. Furniture that has been in your family for generations is being broken up and burned. Wooden tools and implements that will be needed for spring planting are being sacrificed to provide a few more hours of heat. Even parts of the house itself, non-essential wooden beams, floorboards from unused areas, shutters from windows, are being considered as potential fuel sources. The process of scavenging for burnable materials has become a daily obsession for your family. Every piece of wood, no matter how small, is collected and saved. Bark from trees, dried animal dung, and even twisted straw are used to supplement the dwindling wood supply. These alternative fuels burn quickly and provide little heat, but they can extend the life of precious firewood by a few crucial hours. The psychological impact of resource depletion is as devastating as the physical effects. The careful planning and rationing that characterized earlier winter survival has given way to a day-by-day, sometimes hour-by-hour focus on immediate needs. Long-term thinking becomes impossible when you're not sure whether your family will survive the next week. Sleep has become increasingly elusive for everyone in the family. Hunger makes it difficult to fall asleep and causes frequent waking during the night. The reduced heat from carefully rationed fires means that everyone is constantly cold, making comfortable sleep impossible. The stress and anxiety of approaching resource depletion creates a state of hypervigilance that prevents the deep, restorative sleep that bodies need to function properly. The lack of adequate sleep compounds all the other problems your family is facing. Judgment becomes impaired, making it more difficult to make the complex decisions required for survival. Immune systems become compromised, increasing susceptibility to the diseases that are common in overcrowded, unsanitary winter conditions. Tempers become shorter, leading to family conflicts at the very time when cooperation is most essential. Your grandmother, who has been the family's source of wisdom and spiritual guidance throughout winter, is showing signs of serious decline. At 58 years old, ancient by medieval standards, she is particularly vulnerable to the effects of cold, hunger, and stress. Her breathing has become labored, and she spends most of her time sleeping or in a state of semi-consciousness that worries everyone in the family. The question of how to allocate limited resources among family members has become increasingly difficult and painful. Should the remaining food be distributed equally, even though this means everyone gets inadequate nutrition? Should larger portions go to the adults who are doing the physical work necessary for survival? Should the children get priority because they are most vulnerable to malnutrition? Should your grandmother receive extra care because of her age and wisdom? Or should resources be focused on family members who are more likely to survive? These aren't abstract ethical questions. They're immediate, practical decisions that must be made multiple times each day. Every piece of bread, every spoonful of soup, every stick of firewood represents a choice about who gets what and why. The emotional toll of making these decisions is devastating for your parents, who must balance their love for all family members against the harsh mathematics of survival. The village community, which provided mutual support during earlier phases of winter, has largely collapsed under the pressure of individual family survival needs. Neighbors who shared resources in November are now too desperate to help others. The informal networks of cooperation and aid that characterized autumn preparation have been replaced by suspicion, competition, and sometimes outright hostility. Some families have resorted to theft to supplement their dwindling resources. Tools, food, and fuel disappear from storage areas, taken by neighbors who are facing their own desperate circumstances. The social bonds that held the community together during easier times have been strained beyond the breaking point by the extreme conditions of late winter. Violence has erupted in some cases. The blacksmith family and the carpenter family, who have been neighbors and friends for decades, are now involved in a bitter dispute over firewood that was allegedly stolen from one family's woodpile. The argument has escalated to the point where both families are armed and threatening each other, creating a dangerous situation that could result in deaths that would devastate both families. The church, which provided spiritual comfort and practical support during earlier winter months, is also struggling with the effects of resource depletion. The priest, Father William, is as hungry and cold as everyone else in the village. Church services have become irregular because the church building is too cold to use safely. The charitable resources that the church normally provides to the most desperate families have been exhausted. Religious faith, which sustained many families through the worst of winter, is being tested by the current circumstances. Some people are turning to prayer and religious observance with increased fervor, seeing their suffering as a test of faith that must be endured. Others are beginning to question why a benevolent God would allow such suffering, especially among innocent children and elderly people who have lived righteous lives. Your family's faith remains strong, but it's being tested in ways that would have been unimaginable during easier times. Your grandmother's prayers have become increasingly desperate, pleading not just for survival, but for relief from the constant suffering that has become the family's daily reality. The religious stories and teachings that provided comfort during earlier winter months now seem inadequate to address the magnitude of current hardships. The physical deterioration of family members is becoming impossible to ignore. Your youngest brother's malnutrition has progressed to the point where he can barely walk without assistance. Your sister's constant complaints of cold and fatigue indicate that her body is struggling to maintain basic functions. Even the adults are showing signs of serious physical decline that could become life-threatening if conditions don't improve soon. Medical care, already primitive by modern standards, has become virtually non-existent during this phase of winter survival. The village's wise woman, who provided herbal remedies and basic medical care during healthier times, is herself too weak and malnourished to help others. The herbs and medicinal plants that might provide some relief are buried under snow or have been consumed as food supplements. Simple injuries that would be minor inconveniences during warmer months now become serious threats to survival. A cut finger that becomes infected could lead to blood poisoning. A sprained ankle that limits mobility could prevent someone from contributing to family survival tasks. Even minor illnesses like colds or stomach upsets can become dangerous when they affect people who are already weakened by malnutrition and exposure. The approaching end of winter provides both hope and additional anxiety for your family. Spring is still weeks away, but everyone knows that the current rate of resource consumption makes it unlikely that your family can survive until warmer weather arrives. The mathematical calculations that have governed winter survival throughout the season now point to a conclusion that no one wants to acknowledge. Your family's resources will be exhausted before spring arrives. This realization forces your family to consider options that would have been unthinkable earlier in winter. Should some family members leave to seek help from relatives in other villages, even though travel is still dangerous, and there's no guarantee that other families have resources to share? Should the family abandon their home and try to reach a larger town where charitable organizations might provide assistance? Should they begin consuming the seed grain that has been saved for spring planting, even though this would make it impossible to grow crops next year? Each of these options carries enormous risks and potential consequences that extend far beyond the current winter. Leaving the village means abandoning the home, possessions, and community ties that represent your family's entire life. Consuming seed grain might enable survival through the current crisis, but could lead to starvation next winter if no crops can be planted. The decisions that must be made now will affect your family's future for years to come, if they survive to have a future. As February draws to a close and March approaches, your family faces the most critical period of their winter survival ordeal. The resources that have sustained them through the worst of winter are nearly exhausted, but spring is still tantalizingly out of reach. The next few weeks will determine whether your family joins the ranks of winter survivors or becomes another casualty of medieval winter's relentless assault on human survival. The breaking point has arrived, and your family must find reserves of strength, courage, and ingenuity that they didn't know they possessed. The choices made in the coming days will determine not just who survives until spring, but what kind of people they become in the process of surviving. March 15, 1349. The sound that wakes you this morning is one you haven't heard in months. The steady drip of melting snow from your roof. Outside, the temperature has risen above freezing for the first time since December, and patches of brown earth are beginning to show through the white blanket that has covered your world for so long. Spring is coming, but for your family and many others in the village, this promise of renewal brings as much anxiety as hope. This is March's cruel promise, the tantalizing suggestion that winter's grip is loosening, even as families face their most desperate circumstances. The resources that have sustained your family through the darkest months are now virtually exhausted, but spring is still weeks away from providing any real relief. The gap between the end of winter stores and the beginning of spring foraging represents the most dangerous period of the entire medieval year. Your family's food situation has reached a crisis point that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. The grain stores that once filled several wooden chests are now reduced to perhaps a week's supply of moldy, insect-infested wheat and barley. Your mother spends hours each day carefully picking through this remaining grain, removing the worst of the contamination, while trying to salvage enough edible material to keep the family alive. The process of preparing meals has become an exercise in creative desperation. What your family now calls bread is a mixture of the remaining grain, ground bark from birch trees, and whatever else can be found to add bulk and calories. This concoction is barely edible and provides minimal nutrition, but it fills stomachs and gives the psychological comfort of having something to eat. The preserved meat that provided essential protein throughout winter is completely gone, consumed down to the last scraps and bones. Your family has been surviving on thin broths made by boiling and reboiling bones until they crumble, extracting every possible bit of nutrition from materials that would normally be discarded. Even these bones are now exhausted, leaving your family without any reliable source of protein or fat. The root vegetables that formed the foundation of winter meals are reduced to a few sprouting, partially rotten specimens that must be carefully trimmed and prepared to be safely edible. Your mother has become expert at determining which parts of rotting vegetables can still be consumed and which must be discarded. But even her skills can't make adequate nutrition from inadequate supplies. Foraging has become a daily necessity, but early March offers little in the way of edible wild foods. The snow is still too deep to reach most ground-level plants, and the few early spring greens that might be available are still weeks away from emerging. Your family has been reduced to gathering bark from certain trees, digging for roots in partially frozen ground, and searching for any other natural materials that might provide calories or nutrients. The knowledge required for successful early spring foraging is complex and potentially dangerous. Many plants that will be edible later in spring are toxic when consumed too early. Tree bark must be prepared correctly to be digestible and safe. Roots must be properly identified to avoid poisonous species. Your grandmother's knowledge of wild foods has become literally life-saving. But even her expertise is limited by the harsh conditions and early season. Water, which was a constant challenge during the deep freeze, has become problematic in new ways as the snow begins to melt. The well that served your family throughout winter is now surrounded by muddy, contaminated runoff from melting snow. The water itself, when it can be accessed, often tastes of decay and contamination from months of being sealed under ice. Melting snow provides an alternative water source, but the runoff carries with it months of accumulated dirt, animal waste, and other contaminants that make it dangerous to drink without careful preparation. Your family has learned to collect only the cleanest snow from areas away from animal activity, but even this must be boiled thoroughly before consumption, a process that consumes precious fuel. The firewood situation has reached a state of absolute desperation. Your family's carefully hoarded fuel supply was exhausted a week ago, forcing increasingly creative and destructive measures to maintain the fire that keeps everyone alive. The wooden furniture that has served your family for generations, stools, tables, storage chests, has been systematically broken up and burned. Parts of the house itself are now being sacrificed for fuel. Non-essential wooden beams, floorboards from unused areas, and even sections of the roof structure are being removed and burned. Your father knows that this destruction will make the house less weatherproof and structurally sound, but the immediate need for heat outweighs concerns about long-term damage. The search for alternative fuels has become increasingly desperate and dangerous. Your family ventures out in the muddy, treacherous conditions to gather any combustible materials they can find: dried animal dung, dead branches that can be reached, even twisted straw and dried grass from areas where the snow has melted. These materials burn quickly and provide little heat, but they can extend the life of precious wood by a few crucial hours. The physical condition of your family members has deteriorated to alarming levels. Your youngest brother, now severely malnourished, spends most of his time lying listlessly near the fire. His belly is distended from malnutrition, and his arms and legs have become stick-thin. He rarely speaks or plays, conserving what little energy his body can still produce. Your sister's condition is equally concerning. Her hair has become thin and patchy, and her skin has taken on a grayish pallor that indicates serious nutritional deficiency. She complains constantly of being cold, even when sitting directly next to the fire, and has developed a persistent cough that worries everyone in the family. The adults are showing severe signs of the winter's toll as well. Your father has lost so much weight that his clothes hang on him like sacks. His strength has diminished to the point where tasks that were routine in autumn now require enormous effort. Your mother's milk, which has been sustaining your infant sister, has nearly dried up completely, forcing the family to find alternative ways to feed the baby. Your grandmother's condition has become critical. At her advanced age, the combination of cold, hunger, and stress has pushed her body beyond its ability to recover. She spends most of her time sleeping or in a semi-conscious state, and everyone in the family knows that she may not survive much longer. The question of how to care for her while managing the family's other survival needs has become increasingly difficult. Sleep continues to be elusive for everyone in the family. The constant hunger makes it difficult to fall asleep and causes frequent waking during the night. The reduced heat from carefully rationed fires means that everyone is perpetually cold. The stress of knowing that resources are nearly exhausted creates a state of anxiety that prevents restful sleep. The psychological impact of approaching resource depletion has created a state of crisis that affects every aspect of family life. Conversations have become focused entirely on immediate survival needs: what to eat, what to burn, how to make it through another day. Long-term planning has become impossible when the family's survival can be measured in days rather than weeks or months. Family relationships are being strained to the breaking point by the extreme conditions. Arguments over food distribution, fire management, and resource allocation have become daily occurrences. The love and cooperation that held the family together during earlier phases of winter are being tested by desperation and the knowledge that not everyone may survive. The village community has largely ceased to function as a mutual support system. Families that shared resources and helped each other during autumn and early winter are now too desperate to assist others. The social bonds that held the community together have been replaced by suspicion, competition, and sometimes open hostility. Some families have already succumbed to winter's final assault. The Miller family, who hadn't been seen for weeks, were found dead in their home when a neighbor finally broke down their door. They had apparently run out of food and fuel simultaneously, and their bodies were discovered huddled together around a cold fireplace. Their deaths serve as a stark reminder of what awaits families who can't find ways to extend their resources until spring. Other families have made desperate decisions that will affect them for years to come. The Carpenter family has consumed their seed grain, the wheat and barley that was supposed to be planted for next year as harvest. This decision may enable them to survive the current crisis, but it means they will have no crops to harvest next autumn, potentially setting up an even worse situation for next winter. Some families have abandoned their homes entirely, setting out on dangerous journeys to seek help from relatives in other villages or to reach larger towns, where charitable organizations might provide assistance. These journeys are extremely risky in the current conditions, with muddy roads, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of bandits who prey on desperate travelers. The church, which provided spiritual comfort and practical support throughout winter, is also struggling with the effects of resource depletion.
Father William is as hungry and desperate as everyone else in the village. The church's charitable resources have been exhausted, and the building itself is too cold and damaged to provide effective shelter for community gatherings. Religious faith is being tested in ways that challenge the fundamental beliefs that have sustained people through easier times. Some villagers have turned to prayer and religious observance with increased fervor, seeing their suffering as a test that must be endured with faith and patience. Others are beginning to question why a benevolent God would allow such suffering, especially among innocent children and elderly people. Your family's faith remains strong. It is being challenged by the reality of your grandmother's declining condition and the knowledge that some family members may not survive until spring. The prayers that provided comfort during earlier winter months now carry a desperate urgency that reflects the family's critical situation. The approaching spring brings both hope and additional challenges. While warmer weather will eventually provide relief from heating needs and access to wild foods, spring is still weeks away from providing any immediate help. The gap between the end of winter stores and the beginning of spring resources represents the most dangerous period of the entire year. Early spring foraging requires knowledge, energy, and mobility that your family may not possess. The edible plants that will eventually provide nutrition are still buried under snow or haven't yet emerged. The work required to gather and prepare wild foods demands physical strength that family members may not have after months of malnutrition. Even when spring foods become available, they often require careful preparation to be safe and nutritious. Many early spring plants are bitter, tough, or mildly toxic when consumed raw. They must be properly prepared, boiled, roasted, or processed in other ways to be safely edible. This preparation requires fuel, tools, and knowledge that may not be available to desperate families. The promise of spring also brings anxiety about the future beyond immediate survival. Families who have consumed their seed grain will face starvation next winter, unless they can somehow obtain new seeds for planting. Houses that have been damaged by fuel scavenging will need extensive repairs that require materials, tools, and energy that may not be available. Right? The social fabric of the village will need to be rebuilt after the winter's devastation. Relationships that have been damaged by competition for resources will need to be repaired. Community cooperation systems that have collapsed under pressure will need to be reestablished. The dead will need to be buried and mourned, and their families will need support to survive without their contributions. As March progresses and the signs of approaching spring become more evident, your family faces the most critical decisions of their entire winter survival ordeal. Should they consume the last of their grain stores now, risking having nothing left if spring is delayed? Should they continue the destructive process of burning parts of their house for fuel? Should some family members leave to seek help elsewhere, even though this might mean never seeing each other again? The cruel promise of March is that spring is coming, but it may not come soon enough to save everyone who has survived winter's worst assaults. The families who make it through this final test will have demonstrated remarkable resilience, ingenuity, and determination. But they will also carry the physical and psychological scars of their ordeal for the rest of their lives. Your family has survived longer than many others in the village, but the final test is still ahead. The next few weeks will determine whether the sacrifices, suffering, and determination of the past months will be rewarded with survival, or whether your family will join the casualties of winter's final, cruel assault on human endurance. The promise of spring hangs in the air like the scent of melting snow, but it remains just out of reach for families who have already given everything they have to the fight for survival.
April 8th, 1349. You wake to a sound that seems impossible after months of winter silence. The cheerful song of a robin outside your window. The temperature has climbed to a remarkable 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and for the first time in nearly 5 months, you can see patches of green grass emerging through the melting snow. Spring has finally arrived, but for your family and the survivors in your village, this awakening brings both profound relief and new challenges that will test different aspects of human resilience. The transformation of the landscape over the past few weeks has been dramatic and life-saving. Where once there was only white snow and brown earth, now there are the first tentative signs of renewed life. Tiny green shoots are pushing through the soil. Early wildflowers are beginning to bloom in protected areas, and the trees are showing the first swelling of buds that promise leaves and shade in the weeks to come. But this natural renewal reveals the full extent of winter's devastation on your village. Houses that seemed intact under snow are now revealed to be severely damaged, with roofs partially collapsed from the weight of ice walls, cracked from repeated freezing and thawing, and structural damage from families burning parts of their homes for fuel. Your own house shows the scars of winter survival: missing floorboards, damaged beams, and gaps in the walls where wood was removed for burning. The human toll of winter is even more apparent now that families are beginning to emerge from their isolated survival struggles. Of the 43 families that entered winter in your village, only 31 have survived intact. 12 families have lost members to cold, hunger, or disease, and 3 families have disappeared entirely, either dead in their homes or departed for unknown destinations in desperate attempts to find help. Your own family has survived, but the cost has been enormous. Your grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days ago, her body finally succumbing to the accumulated stress of months of cold and malnutrition. Her death, while not unexpected, has left a profound emptiness in your family's daily life. She had been the source of wisdom, spiritual guidance, and cultural knowledge that helped sustain everyone through the darkest months. The loss of your grandmother represents more than just personal grief. It is the loss of irreplaceable knowledge about survival, herbal medicine, food preparation, and the countless skills that had been passed down through generations. In medieval times, when literacy was rare and knowledge was transmitted orally, the death of an elderly person meant the permanent loss of information that could be crucial for future survival. Your youngest brother has survived, but he bears the permanent marks of severe malnutrition. His growth has been stunted, and he suffers from health problems that may affect him for the rest of his life. His teeth are weak and discolored. His bones didn't develop properly during the crucial winter months, and his immune system has been compromised in ways that make him more vulnerable to future illnesses. The other family members are slowly recovering, but the process is gradual and sometimes painful. Your father's strength is returning slowly as better nutrition becomes available, but he has aged visibly during the winter months. Your mother is struggling with depression and anxiety that stem from the constant stress of making life and death decisions for months. Your sister is regaining her health more quickly, but she has become withdrawn and fearful in ways that suggest lasting psychological effects. The availability of food has improved dramatically with the arrival of spring, but the transition from winter starvation to spring abundance requires careful management. After months of eating very little, family members' digestive systems can't handle normal quantities of food. Eating too much too quickly can cause severe stomach problems, and foods that would normally be easily digestible can cause illness in people whose bodies have adapted to near-starvation conditions. Early spring foraging has become a daily activity that provides both nutrition and hope for your family. Your mother and older sister venture out each day to gather the wild plants that are now becoming available: dandelion greens, wild onions, early berries, and the tender shoots of various edible plants. This foraging requires extensive knowledge to distinguish between edible and poisonous plants, and the stakes can be fatal. The first fresh greens after months of preserved and stored foods taste like miracles to your family. Dandelion leaves, bitter and tough by summer standards, seem incredibly flavorful and satisfying after the monotonous diet of winter survival. Wild onions provide flavoring that makes other foods more palatable. Early berries, though small and tart, provide vitamins and nutrients that your family's bodies desperately need. But spring foraging also reveals how much knowledge was lost with your grandmother's death. She knew the locations of the best foraging spots, the optimal times to gather different plants, and the preparation methods that made wild foods safe and nutritious. Without her guidance, your family must rely on incomplete knowledge and careful experimentation that carries risks they can't afford. The return of fresh water has solved one of winter's most persistent problems. Streams and rivers are flowing freely again, providing clean water that doesn't require melting or careful conservation. The well that served your family throughout winter is now easily accessible and producing clean, fresh water that tastes better than anything your family has drunk in months. However, the spring melt has also created new water-related challenges. The rapid melting of accumulated snow has caused flooding in low-lying areas, contaminating some water sources with runoff that carries months of accumulated waste and debris. Your family must be careful about which water sources they use and must continue boiling water from questionable sources to prevent illness. The warming weather has eliminated the need for constant heating, but it has also revealed the extent of damage to your family's fuel supplies and heating infrastructure. The fireplace that was so crucial for winter survival is damaged from months of intensive use. The chimney needs repair, the hearthstones are cracked, and the entire heating system will require significant work before next winter. The firewood that seemed so precious during winter is now revealed to be completely exhausted. Your family will need to begin immediately gathering and seasoning wood for next winter. But this work must compete with other urgent priorities like repairing the house, planting crops, and rebuilding the family's economic foundation. The social fabric of the village is slowly beginning to repair itself as families emerge from winter isolation and begin to interact with neighbors again. But these interactions reveal the extent of winter's damage to community relationships. Families who stole from each other during desperate times must now find ways to rebuild trust and cooperation. Neighbors who refuse to help each other during critical moments must decide whether to forgive and move forward or maintain the grudges that developed during winter. The church is beginning to resume its role as a community center and source of support, but Father William is struggling with his own recovery from winter's hardships. The church building needs extensive repairs. The charitable resources that supported the community have been exhausted, and the priest himself is dealing with the psychological trauma of watching his parishioners suffer and die while being unable to provide adequate help. Easter, celebrated on April 12th this year, provides an opportunity for community healing and renewal, but the celebration is subdued by the losses the village has suffered. Families who have lost members are grieving, families who have survived are exhausted, and everyone is focused on the enormous amount of work required to rebuild their lives before next winter. The agricultural work that will determine next year's survival must begin immediately, but many families face serious challenges in resuming farming activities. Families who consumed their seed grain during winter's final desperate weeks have no crops to plant unless they can obtain seeds from other sources. Tools that were burned for fuel during winter must be replaced or repaired. Draft animals that died during winter must be replaced, but most families lack the resources to purchase new livestock. Your family faces the challenge of planting crops with limited seed grain and damaged tools. Your father has managed to save some wheat and barley seeds, but not enough to plant the family's full allotment of land. He must decide whether to plant a smaller area with adequate seed density or to stretch the available seeds over more land with the risk that the crops will be too thin to produce a good harvest. The physical work of spring planting is particularly challenging for family members who are still recovering from winter malnutrition. Plowing, sowing, and other agricultural tasks require strength and endurance that may not be available after months of inadequate nutrition. Your family must pace the work carefully to avoid injuries or health problems that could jeopardize their recovery. The village's economic system is also struggling to recover from winter's devastation. The miller's water wheel was damaged by ice and needs extensive repairs before it can function properly. The blacksmith lost many of his tools when they were sold or traded for food during winter. The carpenter's workshop was partially dismantled for fuel, and he lacks the materials needed to rebuild his business. Trade relationships with other villages and towns have been disrupted by winter's impact on transportation and communication. Roads that were impassable during winter are now muddy and difficult to travel. Merchants who might normally visit the village with goods and supplies are dealing with their own recovery from winter's effects. The psychological recovery from winter's trauma is perhaps the most challenging aspect of spring's renewal. Family members who made life and death decisions for months are struggling with guilt, anxiety, and depression. Children who witnessed suffering and death are showing signs of emotional disturbance that affect their behavior and development. Adults who lost family members are grieving while simultaneously trying to rebuild their lives. Your family has developed coping strategies that help manage the psychological aftermath of winter survival. Daily routines that focus on positive activities, tending gardens, repairing the house, preparing for better times, provide structure and hope. Family discussions about the future help everyone focus on recovery rather than dwelling on winter's hardships. The knowledge gained during winter survival has made your family more resilient and better prepared for future challenges, but it has also made them more aware of how precarious life can be. The experience of nearly starving has changed everyone's relationship with food. The experience of nearly freezing has changed everyone's appreciation for warmth and shelter. The experience of losing your grandmother has changed everyone's understanding of mortality and the importance of family bonds. As April progresses and spring becomes more established, your family begins to look beyond mere survival toward rebuilding and improvement. Plans are made for repairing the house, expanding the garden, and preparing more thoroughly for next winter. The lessons learned during the past months are being incorporated into long-term strategies that will make the family more resilient in the future. The village community is also beginning to plan for collective recovery and improvement. Discussions are underway about building better storage facilities for grain and fuel, establishing emergency reserves that can help families during future crises, and developing better systems for mutual aid and resource sharing. But even as spring brings hope and renewal, everyone understands that next winter is only 8 months away. The work of rebuilding must be balanced against the need to prepare for future challenges. The families who have survived this winter have gained valuable knowledge and experience, but they have also been weakened by their ordeal and face the enormous task of rebuilding their resources and resilience. The dawn of hope that comes with April's awakening is real and precious, but it's tempered by the understanding that survival is an ongoing challenge that requires constant vigilance, preparation, and community cooperation. Your family has survived winter's worst assault, but they know that their survival depends on learning from their experience and preparing more effectively for the challenges that lie ahead. As we reach the end of our journey through medieval winter survival, the sun is setting on a warm April evening in 1349. Your family sits around a small fire, not the desperate, carefully rationed flames of winter, but a comfortable cooking fire that provides warmth and light without the constant anxiety about fuel consumption. The contrast with those dark winter months is almost overwhelming, and it provides the perfect opportunity to reflect on the incredible story of human survival that we've witnessed. Looking back on the past 6 months, it seems almost miraculous that your family, and indeed, that medieval people in general, managed to survive winters that would kill most modern people within days. The combination of extreme cold, limited food, primitive shelter, and complete lack of modern conveniences created conditions that challenged every aspect of human endurance. Yet somehow, generation after generation of medieval families found ways to endure and even thrive in circumstances that seem impossible by today's standards. The key to understanding medieval winter survival lies not in any single technique or strategy, but in the complex web of knowledge, skills, community relationships, and psychological resilience that families developed over centuries of facing these challenges. Every aspect of medieval life, from house construction to food preservation, from clothing design to family structure, was shaped by the need to survive winter's deadly assault. The preparation that began in late summer was perhaps the most crucial element of survival. Modern people often think of preparation as buying supplies or making plans, but medieval preparation was a months-long process that required precise timing, extensive knowledge, and enormous physical effort. The families who survived winter were those who understood exactly what they needed, how much they needed, and when they needed to begin gathering and preserving resources. The knowledge required for effective preparation was encyclopedic in scope and had been refined over generations of trial and error. Families needed to know which types of wood burned best and how much fuel was required for different weather conditions. They needed to understand food preservation techniques that could keep meat, vegetables, and grain edible for months without refrigeration. They needed to know how to construct and maintain shelters that could protect against extreme cold while conserving heat efficiently. This knowledge wasn't written down in books or taught in schools. It was passed down through families and communities as oral tradition. Children learned by watching and participating in preparation activities from an early age. Teenagers were given increasing responsibility for crucial tasks. Adults continued learning and refining their skills throughout their lives. The elderly served as repositories of knowledge and wisdom that could mean the difference between survival and death. The community cooperation that characterized medieval winter survival was far more sophisticated than simple mutual aid. Villages developed complex systems of resource sharing, labor exchange, and mutual support that helped ensure that as many families as possible would survive until spring. These systems were based on reciprocity, trust, and the understanding that individual survival was linked to community survival. Families specialized in different aspects of winter preparation and survival, then shared their expertise and resources with others. The blacksmith provided tools and repairs in exchange for food and fuel. The miller processed grain for the entire community. Families with particular skills in food preservation, herbal medicine, or construction shared their knowledge and labor with neighbors who provided other essential services. But this cooperation was balanced by the harsh reality that resources were limited and every family's first responsibility was to its own survival. The social calculations required to navigate these relationships were complex and sometimes painful. Families had to decide when to be generous and when to conserve resources, when to help others and when to focus on their own needs, when to trust neighbors and when to protect against theft or exploitation. The psychological resilience that enabled medieval families to endure months of hardship, danger, and deprivation was perhaps their most remarkable characteristic. Modern people, accustomed to comfort, convenience, and immediate gratification, can barely imagine the mental strength required to face winter, knowing that survival was uncertain, and that every day would bring new challenges and threats. Medieval people developed coping strategies that helped them maintain hope and determination through the darkest months. Religious faith provided comfort and meaning in the face of suffering and uncertainty. Family bonds provided emotional support and motivation to continue fighting for survival. Community traditions and celebrations provided breaks from the monotony and stress of daily survival struggles. The acceptance of hardship as a normal part of life was crucial for psychological survival. Medieval people didn't expect life to be easy or comfortable. They expected it to be difficult and dangerous, and they developed the mental resilience needed to cope with these realities. This acceptance didn't mean passive resignation, but rather active preparation and determined effort to overcome challenges. The physical adaptations that medieval people developed over generations of winter survival were also remarkable. Their bodies were conditioned by lifelong exposure to cold, physical labor, and variable nutrition in ways that made them more resilient than modern people. Their immune systems had adapted to the diseases and parasites that were common in medieval environments. Their metabolisms were more efficient at extracting nutrition from limited and poor quality food sources. But perhaps most importantly, medieval people had realistic expectations about winter survival. They understood that winter was dangerous and that not everyone would survive. They accepted that survival required sacrifice, hardship, and difficult choices. They knew that the margin between life and death was often very small, and that survival depended on preparation, skill, luck, and the will to endure. Modern people, by contrast, expect winter to be a minor inconvenience managed by central heating, grocery stores, and emergency services. We have no experience with the kind of resource scarcity, physical hardship, and life-threatening conditions that medieval people faced every winter. Our bodies, minds, and social systems are adapted to abundance, comfort, and security rather than scarcity, hardship, and danger. The lessons from medieval winter survival are both humbling and inspiring. They remind us of how much we depend on modern technology, infrastructure, and social systems for our basic survival. They demonstrate the incredible resilience and ingenuity that humans can develop when facing extreme challenges. They show us the importance of community cooperation, traditional knowledge, and psychological preparation for dealing with hardship. But these lessons also reveal the enormous progress that humanity has made over the centuries. The winter survival challenges that killed thousands of medieval people each year have been largely eliminated by modern heating, food distribution, medical care, and emergency services. The knowledge and skills that were essential for medieval survival have been replaced by technologies and systems that are far more effective and reliable. The contrast between medieval and modern winter survival highlights both human vulnerability and human progress. Medieval people survived through remarkable displays of courage, ingenuity, and determination. But they also died in large numbers from challenges that modern technology has made manageable. Their survival was a testament to human resilience, but their suffering was a reminder of how harsh life can be without the benefits of modern civilization. As your family sits around their comfortable fire on this warm April evening, they carry with them the knowledge, skills, and psychological strength that enabled them to survive one of history's most challenging winters. They have learned lessons about preparation, cooperation, resilience, and the preciousness of life that will serve them well in future challenges. But they also understand that their survival was not guaranteed, and that many of their neighbors and friends were not as fortunate. The empty houses in the village, the graves that will be dug when the ground fully thaws, and the permanent changes in family structures serve as reminders of winter as deadly power and the fragility of human life. The story of medieval winter survival is ultimately a story about the human capacity to endure, adapt, and overcome seemingly impossible challenges. It's a story about the importance of knowledge, preparation, community, and determination in the face of adversity. It is a story about the sacrifices that previous generations made to ensure that their children and grandchildren would have the opportunity to build better lives. As we conclude our journey through medieval winter survival, we can appreciate both the remarkable achievements of our ancestors and the incredible progress that has been made since their time. We can honor their memory by remembering their struggles and learning from their experiences. We can use their example to inspire us in facing our own challenges and to remind us of the importance of preparation, community, and resilience in an uncertain world. The long dark of medieval winter is over, but the lessons it teaches us about human survival, community cooperation, and the preciousness of life remain as relevant today as they were 600 years ago. In understanding how medieval families survived the coldest nights, we gain insight into the fundamental aspects of human nature that enable us to endure, adapt, and ultimately thrive in the face of even the most daunting challenges. And so ends our epic journey through medieval winter survival, a testament to human resilience, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bonds that hold families and communities together through the darkest times. Thank you for joining me on this remarkable exploration of how our ancestors faced and conquered winter's deadly embrace. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to subscribe for more fascinating stories that will help you fall asleep while learning about the incredible saga of human survival and civilization. Sweet dreams, and remember, every warm night, every full meal, and every comfortable moment is a gift that our ancestors fought desperately to provide for us.